Good morning, everyone. Today we will listen to the conference, Deltaic Agro-Ecological Urbanism Variations on Settling with Water. And it is a real pleasure to introduce Professors Shannon and Bruno de Meulder. I am sure the conference will inspire you, especially if you are working in contexts where water and landscape play a critical role. Professor Shannon and Professor de Meulder teach in the Master of Human Settlements and the Master of Urbanism, Landscape and Planning at the University of Leuven in Belgium. They also are the directors of the OSA research group, where they have PhD students and researchers from Europe, Latin America, Asia, and Africa. I was very lucky to have them as supervisors for my PhD work. Professor Shannon work focuses on the evolving relation of landscape and landscape infrastructure and urbanization. She was the one who coined the term water urbanism that now is worldwide used. Professor Meulder is the head of the Department of Architecture at KU Leuven, and he combines his urban experience with urban analysis and engage with the social and ecological challenges of our times. They are both pioneers in the field of landscape urbanism, and they publish numerous articles and also books. Without further delay, I will give the space to Professor Shannon and Professor Bruno de Meulder, but I will copy also a link in the chat. If you want to post questions, please fill that form. And if you also would like to do the question in Zoom, you can do that at the end of the meeting. But if your question is in Spanish, please use the form. Thank you, and thank you very much, Kelly and Bruno, for joining us and accepting this invitation.
Okay, I hope you can see our screen. Can you just confirm that, Claudia? Great.
Yes.
Okay, so thank you very much. Thank you very much, first and foremost, of course, to Claudia Rojas. And we're very happy to have now collaboration with Professor Claudia, who is now working, of course, in University of the Coast. We'd also like to thank Karen Stanley and another alumni of our program who has done a lot of the working with Claudia to set this up, to host it with the translation, etc. Karen is coming to us from Asunción in Paraguay, and also to Jessica Salazar, who will be hopefully be able, we apologize in advance if we're talking too fast. We will try to keep it slow so we can have proper translation. So as Claudia has introduced, Professor de Meulder and I together developed the concept quite some years ago of water urbanism, and particularly trying to work through a lot of work we've done in Vietnam. Also, Claudia worked quite a lot with us on some of these projects that we're going to show today. So we're focusing on the region of the world in Southeast Asia. Oops. Yes, where there's, so here you're seeing mainland Southeast Asia. And what we want to talk about today are 3 projects across 3 scales that all work with the Mekong River. So the Mekong River is a river, it's one of the largest in the world. It's approximately 5,000 kilometers long, and it travels through 6 countries. So it starts up in the Tibetan Plateau, travels through China, Myanmar, Laos, Thailand, Cambodia, and ends in Vietnam. What you see here are 2, I think, quite interesting maps that show us on the one hand, the topographical areas. So of course, we're going to be talking about the area that you see in the south, Vietnam South, where it's labeled Phnom Penh, and further south to the East Sea. That's the part of the Cambodian and Vietnamese Delta. And what you see in the other map to the right is the population density. We know across the world, similarly, I suppose in Colombia as well, wherever you have a delta, we tend to have quite a lot of high population density. It has a lot to do, of course, with the need to be near water and the productivity of the landscape. What we've labeled this presentation, understanding agro-ecological urbanism in deltas. So understanding the particularities of what geography gives us, what geology gives us, and also the subtitle was settling with water. We are very fond of using the term settling. In English, settling is a very nice word because it means, of course, settlement, human settlements, how we as humankind inhabit the territory. But it also means settling with, as in settling a bill, finding a way to deal with. So it's on the one hand, settling with water, literally living with it, along it, sometimes over it, but also finding different ways to deal with it. So here we're seeing the different river basins, very large river basins. So of course, the one we're talking about now is the one in bright green, which is a very large area. It drains almost 800,000 square kilometers and quite a huge discharge of water. The other map that you see on the right is also pointing out the productivity of the land. Quite a lot of, it's known, as you'll see in later slides, as a rice basket of the territory. More recently, it's been switching to aquaculture, which is of course much more economic for the inhabitants, but at the same time more challenging in terms of environmental concerns. As in many places around the world, the Mekong Delta is also challenged by many things. In this case, the Mekong Delta is changing dramatically in terms of its hydrology and the way it's able to provide livelihoods because of massive dam building. Particularly as countries in the region get much wealthier, there's a higher demand for electricity. So the river itself is giving power, being dammed, and completely changing the sediment flow, the livelihoods, and the different possibilities of living with a deltaic waterscape. So what you're seeing on this map are all the dams, the left map, that are under constructions, that are presently operating, and as well seeing a more zoomed in on the right side, again, of the dams through the different countries in the Delta. So here we think is a very beautiful image that's showing us really the topography. So a delta is of course incredibly low-lying area. The Mekong Delta that we're focusing on has, of course, water knows no bounds. It doesn't know political boundaries. The Mekong Delta is about 75% in Vietnam, and the other 25% is in Cambodia. We see a very large lake in the northwest, which is a very interesting lake that also changes its direction of the water due to the forces of water that come through it. Here again, another image where we see the power of this water system. And what you're seeing, particularly in this kind of dark blue purple area, is the place that is traditionally inundated and wet also in the dry season. So we tend to think that a lot of the water and flooding problems would come along the coastal areas, but as you'll see in later maps, The flooding, of course, has to do with sea level rise, that's rising, of course, with global warming, but also the lay of the land, the topography, and where there's different topographical depressions. Again, some older maps here, very interesting, where you see the different vegetation. The brown is the area that's highly cultivated. A lot of it has been engineered, has been irrigated. In the purple, we see a very thin necklace of mangroves. The area used to be all mangroves, but of course, as humankind came in and settled, many of these mangroves disappeared. And again, in this kind of blue, we have an incredible system of wetlands, marshlands, again, that are changing dramatically due to the upstream building of dams, etc. Again, as zoom in, we know that deltas around the world are highly populated. Here we're seeing a diagram of the most populated areas. So we have the, say, economic capital of Vietnam, here labeled Saigon, today known as Ho Chi Minh City, also in Cambodia, Phnom Penh, and then a whole series of other secondary cities that are within the Mekong Delta that are highly productive areas, but also the Mekong Delta in Vietnam accounts for about 20 million people of a population in the country of Vietnam of 98 million people. The population of Cambodia is about 16 million, and the majority of them are in the Delta. What's very interesting looking back and understanding the history of the movements of people, we know a watery landscape as deltas are, they're great attractors of populations, but historically this delta has been a place also of incredible contestations. The contestations also have a lot to do with, you could say, competing groups of different ethnic groups of people, and then of course the different shock and waves of development, and you could say also of devastation that has come to this area through colonial times, through wars. And what we see now as a map of the area is we've got primarily Vietnamese living in Vietnam, primarily Khmers living in Cambodia, but we also have in the bright pink, we see specks of Cham, so the Muslim population, and we also have pockets of Vietnamese in Cambodia and pockets of Khmers in Vietnam. So it tends to be a very interesting area. Of course, these different ethnic groups have very different worldviews, different ways of understanding water, and different ways of settling. So here we see, again, a drawing that we've put together of understanding the extent of the Mekong Delta. So the Mekong Delta with a large part in Vietnam that we're going to focus on presenting to you some design research projects. And further north and further upstream are areas in Cambodia. Like many deltas in the world, but also you could say to a certain degree exaggerated in Southeast Asia because of its massive, almost tiger economy development status, there's a lot of pressure. So the lake that we've talked about in Cambodia, the very large area in the northwest of the Delta, it's traditionally provided incredible amount of livelihood, but also nutrition for a great deal of the rural population. And it's running dry because of the dams upstream, because of different threats of global warming. So it's presenting major challenges. Because of the massive, you could say, growth and development of this part of the world, there's also problems to a certain degree of, as many people settle, they try to live high and dry to protect themselves from the kind of vulnerabilities and flooding of the waters, monsoon floodings, and they build land. They tend to fill wetlands and swamps with sand. They dredge sand from the rivers. They cut down and they mine sand also from topography. So there's a kind of major shift in the topographical area due to the threat, you could say, of urbanization. And as well, as you see, these are all a few slides taken from National Geographic. So there's been quite a lot of focus of trying to understand these threats that are coming to the region, not only changing the hydrology, bringing new threats of drought and flooding, but also bringing quite a lot of difficulties, you could say, potentially in food security. It used to be a place that was the rice basket of the world, and that is now certainly being challenged. And again, another image, we know that due to global warming worldwide, we have more and more vulnerability of our landscapes, more threats. But the way we also engineer our waterways, the way we build dams, they simply continue to almost accentuate, accelerate, and exacerbate, you could say, many of the risks that we already have here, risking, as you see in the subtitle, to the fish, the soil, and eventually the humankind. So what I think is interesting and what we're going to focus on, there's been quite a lot of projections, many different projections by many different groups, including, of course, the IPCC, the Intergovernmental Panel on Climate Change. And what's interesting as urbanists is to understand somehow the threats that are brought to the area, but also how it gives opportunities to completely rethink development as usual. And here in particular, we need to understand that this part of the world, deltas everywhere in the world, are highly threatened by sea level rise, by more intense monsoon and rain events, but at the same time by droughts. So that's something I think very interesting for us to think about when we think about settling with or without water.
Yeah, Vietnam, or the Mekong Delta, of course, always has been, as part of Vietnam, has always been related to land and water. It's deeply embedded in the Vietnamese culture. Vietnam dat Ngoc, meaning nothing else than earth and water, in which the own mythology and the gods and so on have everything to do with this interplay between water and land. As also you can see in the beautiful map on the right, which is a 15th century map of the Ly dynasty in Vietnam, which is exemplifying in many ways the way in which to look to the territory as a water system and a mountain system, and the meeting between the two. The Mekong Delta, of which we're going to present the Mekong Delta Regional Development Plan that was made in the second half of 2015-2020, more or less, if I remember well, as a plan for the Mekong Delta 2030-2050, is dealing with what we see now on the aerial image, in which, of course, the water system is the asset to start from. Is the south of Vietnam, and a bit without too much respect, you could say it is just one gigantic quagmire, that has been turned into a gigantic mud plain. The river is supplying water. It's creating sedimentation. Sedimentation is creating the riverbanks. The riverbanks are the land. The land is the highest along the river and is deepest beside it, which are the lowlands and the water. The canals are draining the quagmire, and in the dry season they are irrigating the land, which makes this one of the most productive lands in the world. Is the rice basket of Vietnam and a major food provider for the world. it has a seasonal system. Of course, this was also recognized during colonial times. What you see here is two maps out of the French colonial period. They show many things, but one of the things you can remark is the gigantic density of occupation, which evidently has to do with simply the fact that it's so fertile, and that's what deltas have common almost everywhere in the world, that they're the most fertile lands, and so they're the land of opportunity to intend, and then they are intensively occupied. You see it also that the delta has been transformed drastically during the French colonial period, and with the whole canal system, we'll come back to that. And another detail, perhaps, which is not uninteresting to notify, is the presence of Saigon in the east, which is actually from the Don Lang Saigon delta, but the mud plain, so to speak, from this delta and the Mekong Delta form one unity. It makes a bit that Saigon has become nowadays, Ho Chi Minh City has become the kind of outside capital of the Mekong Delta, the gate to the Mekong Delta. It also explains the whole canal system that is functioning perpendicular to the river system by uniting these two mud plains. A colonial map of the Kamau Peninsula, so the tip of the Mekong Delta during the colonial period. So this is a map of the kind of more or less between brackets as found condition, or at least how the French colonial system found it. And it's drawing its very complicated water system, and that is typical for the delta. The Kamau Peninsula is a peninsula which is gaining land, because we understand, if we understand that the Mekong River is pushing more than 500 cubic kilometers of water into the sea every year, and with that comes millions of tons of sand that are in front of the river in the sea, and then the tides of the sea and the streams, the Gulf streams, make the land, the sand sediment, and increasing the peninsula. The plan on the left side is interesting for our sake, at least. It is interesting to understand the colonization of the territory, first by the Vietnamese themselves. This is the bright blue lines. They are at the edge of what is now Vietnam and Cambodia. They have two purposes, of course. They have military purposes of defining the boundaries between what remains Khmer and what becomes Vietnamese, but they are also, of course, unifying perpendicular to the river system, uniting the mud plain as one field. And then in dark blue, the start of the French colonization project, with covering the field with canals. So it's not necessary, it's with star systems and grid systems that are draining the big gigantic mud plain into one productive rice basket for export agriculture. It goes hand in hand with a lot of forced labor, or let's say collective, between brackets, collective energy used to create this gigantic canal system. But simultaneously, it can have been coercive labor that realized most of these canal systems, being it under the Vietnamese regime or the French colonial regime. It also brought a gigantic potential of development, and also the kind of the commercial spirit, which was always a bit off the hook, a bit to the south region, the commercial region, the most productive and industrious region of the territory. So we have witnessing the last 3 centuries in the Mekong Delta, at least surely in the Vietnamese part for the last 3 centuries, and in the Cambodian part for longer, much longer, the development of a particular water river civilization, which is a frontier river water civilization, where the threshold between the land, the river, and the land is the place of exchange, is also the highest land, being it during the pre-colonial time, the colonial time, and our contemporary moment. The gigantic quagmire mudplain has been transformed since quite a long time in a very extensive production system. It's a bit extractive because the largest part nowadays is for export, and this extractive system started as extractive system during the French colonial period, turning the quagmire into productive land, in which very slight differences in topography make the distinction between dry, or at least walkable and not walkable production land and not production lands. With the advent of the 20th century, the big disease of the 20th century also comes in of the connectivity with car infrastructure systems, and we get more or less a warp and woof system between the water system as infrastructure in the Mekong Delta and the road system. The road system is relatively underdeveloped in comparison with other regions in the world. Also for the very simple reason that building a road in the quagmire in the mudplain is extremely expensive. It's 10 times more expensive to build a road than to build a canal. And it's much more expensive to maintain the road that anyway is sinking always in the mud than maintaining the canal system, which is declaring the kind of backwardness between brackets, or the kind of perceived backwardness with an underdeveloped road system, which nevertheless still is overwhelmingly present.
So here, before we jump into, as I say, some design research and some projects, for us, it's always very important to understand how projects can transform policy. So also understanding at both the international level, the regional level, and the national level, different initiatives, different projects. In the case of Vietnam, you see something called the National Target Program for Climate Change. It was one of the earliest countries in the world to set up in every line ministry as a climate change specialist. They know they're very vulnerable. For us, it was in a certain sense, it remains very interesting to understand the bigger impacts. So what I think we'd like to draw your attention to is in the middle of this slide. We know that we're in a delta. We're having all the things we know, like sea level rise, temperature rise, climate extremes, floods and droughts, changes in rainfall, more monsoons and typhoons. And of course, that will affect very dramatically the agricultural productivity, entire ecosystems. And then it will also have, you could say, an effect, cause an effect on tourism, on infrastructure development, and on so-called climate refugees. And all of that also kind of ties into really big issues that we're seeing coming globally with disease, food scarcity, food security, different notions of pollution and flooded lands. So for us, we're always trying to update, to understand. Also, when you see things like saline intrusion, we know it's something you could say a little bit out of the world of urbanism, but it has dramatic effects, how we relate to it as urbanists, as designers, to again rethink the notion of settling with water.
Let's say a stereotypical image of the Mekong Delta, the rice basket of Vietnam, where it can be a dramatically open landscape and vast landscapes, but which are always occupied, where there's always people, where there's always production being made on any square meter available. It's a region which is knowing to live with the river, which is have the experience of living with the tides, living with the seasons, living with the monsoons, living with the typhoons, but nevertheless is experiencing step by step changes of climate, and is experiencing its growing vulnerability. So this is a picture, I think, 15 years ago already, of Kanto, the capital city, or the major city in the Mekong Delta, that from time to time gets blocked in its daily functioning, to the big pleasure of the children in its normal functioning. So we have been involved together with the Southern Institute of Urban Planning in 2018 till more or less 2020, if you remember, with a commission to make a plan for the Mekong Delta region, a plan for 2030 and a vision to 2050, in which we were happy to also exploit Claudia, that amongst others made this beautiful drawing. This is reminding us of the plan. The pink square is showing more or less the area for which the plan is made. So it's not a plan for the whole Mekong Delta, it's the Vietnamese part of it, which is more or less 20 million people, more or less a quarter or 20% of the Vietnamese population. The plan on which we worked is deliberately a design research plan, which is taking a bit of distance of the conventional way of making planning schemes and starting from big policy schemes, but attempting to restart with a design mind, of course, incorporating planning and policy thoughts. One of the basic layers of our plan is simply the condition of the soil and the suitability of the soil and the way in which this changes over time. Yes, and the very other big thing, of course, is this plan that we made of predicted inundation and saline intrusion, in which we made a kind of a datum line that is so drawing the depth of inundation in the same way as the bathymetry of the sea. And it's showing this kind of paradoxical situation that the coast is more or less high and the big depression comes after it. So which has, of course, to do with the tides, and which has to do with the way the sedimentation process is working in the sense that at the end of the river is where the sediment is, where the river is the slowest, surely in confrontation with the sea tides, and the sedimentation is the biggest. So that's also where the land is the highest. So the combination of soils, the combination of climate change things that we see, the combination of the water system and the inundation threats, and the productivity of the land, effects of salination, made us to make one basic major step in the way in which to conceive the Mekong Delta Regional Development Plan, is the definition of agro-ecological zones, which means that it's a combination of the agricultural potential given by the water, given by the soil and the variation in soil conditions, and given by the inundations coming, so the climate change and the salination coming. And that leads us to the definition of 6 agro-ecological zones, in which the idea then is to find a balance, shifting from the purely simply monofunctional, monocultural, super extractive agriculture of the region to more balanced agro-ecological development, in which the locational assets as found in terms of geography, geology, water, land defined. So there were 6 in that iteration. 6 agro-ecological zones were defined, each with a capital city, in which we also defined 6 proposed innovation centers as kind of campuses of innovation to learn to capitalize on the existing knowledge of how to operate in this land, but simultaneously to adapt to adapt to the global warming and climate change conditions. Yes. To give a quick overview, the plain of reeds, which is the most northern part, is actually the most deep. Its character, it's only half meter above sea level, so it has very particular settlement patterns from the past, given the plain of reeds being the area that always is inundated during the monsoon season. So living on stilts or living on the water and having very special crops with rice that grow very high through this deep waters, and the condition of submerged forest that give specific ecological conditions, but also specific potentials for productivity, which is quite different than the freshwater alluvial, which is next to the big branches of the Mekong River, which is actually also the most fertile part of the territory, in which you can grow anything else, which is now the region for rice culture, but also where all the orchards for fruit cultivation are. Which is different than the armpit in the Gulf of the Mekong Delta in the Gulf of Thailand. Is the only region in which there are a number of hills sticking out, 7 hills, which are then unfortunately also intensively used for mining. There's quarries, which is a region known for the shrimp farming, specifically, and the fish farming. The Trans-Basak depression next to it, which has this specificity that it's never threatened until now by flooding nor by saline intrusion, given the distance that it has from the sea and the distance it has from the main branches of the river. And then the Camao Peninsula, which is the tip of the Mekong Delta in Vietnam, which has been developed in the last, between brackets, which was predominantly a mangrove with predominantly mangroves until quite relatively recent, which has been turned into rice culture after the reunification to a large part, and nowadays is shifting, also given the salination, on a massive scale to aquaculture, which is bringing revenue for farmers, which is 8 to 10 times larger than rice culture. So there's no big secret in this booming industry, which is organizing a gigantic metamorphosis and creating this mosaic of water ponds behind. And then finally, of course, there is also the coastal system with the mangroves and dune systems, which traditionally is a brackish region, which has since the 1990s, with this gigantic works on the river and the dam and the closing off of the sea, has been turned into sweetwater systems, which did lead to an own type of development in that part of the Mekong Delta. So the first step for making the Mekong River Delta plan is this definition of 6 agroecological regions and the intention to enhance development, which is related to the specificity of this 6 different agroecological regions. Even if they are common denominators for the whole Mekong Delta, there are very specific qualities and distinctions in these 6 things. The infrastructure plan that we provided is working, of course, with the existing infrastructure plans, which are Asia Development Bank and World Bank promoted highway systems, in which one of the biggest moves is the yellow lines in the plan that you can see is highways. That the yellow dotted lines are the highways that we actually don't want to build. So it's taking a step back from the, let's say, generic policy of making a big grid and connecting everything to everything with the highway every 50 kilometers. That is unreasonable, we thought. Surely in places where we know that by 2040 and 2050 will be completely inundated and will kill the investment before of the highways before it is. So we're moving from generic concepts of equal accessibility through a grid to a more hierarchical system with a kind of feeder highways on safe land, and collector highways, I mean, and feeders that lead to this highways that can decrease in importance depending on the distance they are away from the highway, and can be intertwined, of course, with the water conditions, which is very different. As you can see also in this map, there's basically, apart from the logic of 6 agroecological regions, simultaneously, there's 3 big water conditions. The plain of reeds, or the northern part, which is the most inundated part, the middle part, which is has to do less with inundation, and then the coastal part. So 3 water conditions with depth of water and levels of salination that are quite distinct. And the infrastructure plan is intertwining with that. It included a big new international airport and a big new deep sea port. An essential part of the plan is to take steps back from the hard engineering and rethinking what the geography of the region is, or reconceptualizing the way in which, in planning terms and design terms, we think about it. It's taking a step back from the line defense of the land in relation to the sea, and start seeing the coast not so much as a line, but as something with a depth. Hence this kind of lace drawing in which new mangroves, restoration mangroves, and new types of mixed hybrid landscape forms, which are combining pieces of mangroves and productive lands, are interwoven and restoring or building a productive mangrove afforestation system along the coast, in which productivity is included, but not simply taking over the national. It also goes hand in hand with the constructing of new artificial land, making use of the big movement of sand along the coast that is shifting direction depending on the season and the Gulf streams. Of these millions of tons of sediments that are floating across the sea is a system of sand catch, just as dunes are constructed to build new land on which the new international harbor and new ecologies could be restored. The combination of all these elements gave this type of plan, in which the plain of reeds in the north, you can see quite clearly, it's seen as also as a reverse of roles as a water reservoir system, that catches the water and during the wet season, contains it for a lot, and then after, in the dry season, feeds again the whole delta, with it, the coastal system as a separate system, and so on. You also see the new harbor that is projected as the endpoint of the Trans-Asian highway that is connecting Cambodia, Thailand, Cambodia, and Vietnam. As we had 3 water conditions, 6 agroecological zones, and 3 water conditions with the floodplains more to the north, far away from the coastline. We also worked on new types of settling in the future within these territories, with new typologies of how to live with this basically 3 water conditions of the continuously flooded plain with monsoon reservoirs, and typologies on stilts or floating productive infrastructures. The alluvial plain that we know is the most fertile and which is the less threatened by salination and by flooding, in which an intensific, of course, that will be the area which will be hosting a lot of the climate refugees. And so development will have to be intensified. And so in each of these conditions, the new typologies that we foresee are intensifications of the use of the landscape. It's always multiplicity in the landscape. It's and energy production and agriculture production and fruit production and settling simultaneously in one and the same space. So moving away from the monoculture, moving away from monofunctional planning to multitude of uses in one and the same space, in a more intensified, but also in a more sustainable and ecological way. And then the coastal system, which has to do with salination, which has to do with protection of the territory for the coastal protection system, building through nature-based solutions as the mangrove by excellence are, and the mangroves also as the water purification system, natural water purification system, as one of the most performative systems that one can imagine, in which an interweaving of this mangrove system and productive lands and aquaculture lands can lead to new ways of settling in and with water and making a living in a big section of the territory from upstream to downstream, the existing in the upper scheme and the proposed in the downstream, and a caricature. It is reshuffling the way in which we deal with the mud plain, in which we re-engineer the relationship between of the quagmire of lands and water with what it is now and what it is proposed, with upstream more the flooded region in which new types of edges are built to build big water reservoirs, but also big aquacultural system, the alluvial plain, in which another form of, instead of simply the depletion of the aquifers for agricultural production is switched, which leads to subsidence and leads to big, gigantic problems, is reversed by gravel dry wells to recharge the aquifer, and the building of a new coastal system from the simple system that it is now, with a mixture of mangroves, aquaculture areas and rice culture areas. So the bottom line of the Mekong Delta River Plan is moving to making a shift, which is recognizing the Mekong Delta as the major asset of it being this gigantically productive agriculture and aquacultural land, moving away from monoculture to a plurality of cultures, moving away from monofunctionality to a multitude, to the co-presence of different functions, but also different ecologies. And as you see on the right side, the monkey and the factory and the river and the boat in one and the same view. Is a kind of a co-presence of differences, but adapted to what the carrying capacity, both in literal terms of the soil and of the ecology in the long term, can take. The plan of how it has been that we simply explained to you, we tried to explain you, and of how it has been translated by our Vietnamese partner of the Southern Institute of Urban Planning into the official plan approved in 2020 by the Prime Minister of 2018, sorry, 2018 as the regional development plan at that moment.
Good. So now we're going to as Bruno explained, we're staying in the Mekong Delta, but we're changing scales. So from this regional redevelopment plan of the Mekong Delta, we're now going to show something a little bit middle scale, and then we'll go down to an even smaller scale. So this was an invited competition. Our research group of OSA, together with the Vietnamese Institute of Urban Planning, which is based in Hanoi. So this was a large competition. There were 5, you could say, hotshot offices, and then us. We got third prize. We're kind of there to be, to provoke, I would say a little bit, the business as usual. It was a competition that was won by Sasaki and is presently being developed. What you see here is the juxtaposition of 2 beautiful photographs. One of the historic city of Saigon, where you can see very clearly the colonial grid. And then on the right side is where you can see on the other side of the river, the major river, the Saigon River, you can see this incredible system of mangroves. So here is the zoom in where we're working. Before we were at the whole delta. Now we're in the, we're not officially in the Mekong Delta. We're in the Dong Nai Delta, which is a larger river system that abuts, or another river system, sorry, that abuts the Mekong Delta. And it's where the city of Ho Chi Minh, or Saigon as it was previously called, is developed. And the competition program was basically to double the size of the city of Saigon. So we worked together with understanding our own development plan that was made for the Mekong Delta, but a series of British consultants also worked again with the Southern Institute of Urban Planning to develop a regional plan for Saigon. And our project now for the Vietnamese government was more or less looking at this area in pink. The population today of Ho Chi Minh City is 9 million. And the idea is to mirror it across the river to the east to create, say, another 9 million. The population in Vietnam, it's a very young population. It's growing economically, but also in population size. And this kind of doubling of Saigon is, you could say, somehow typical of a larger part of the country. Of course, with many people also coming from a rural to urban migration. So here we see a plan from 1882 that was developed. The French came. So Saigon is an interesting city. It's only about 3 centuries old. The northern part of Vietnam is much older. But there was a citadel in the 1700s, so in the early part, or the end of, sorry, of the 18th century. And then Saigon got taken in as part of the Great Indochine Federation, as part of the French colonial project that started in 1887. It started in the south of Vietnam, what is now known as Vietnam, and it continued until 1954, whereupon the Americans, say, stood in southern Vietnam, and then there was a long battle in Vietnam known as the American War, in many parts of the world also the Vietnam War. So it's a city that has been at a center of contestation. But for us, what was very interesting in looking at the history of Saigon, Saigon is something that means cotton trees. So it was initially settled, again, by a different ethnic group known as a village in the forest. And then to a little bit more to the west, further on along the canals, it also had a counterpart city called Cholon, which meant big market. And this was the, say, Chinese part of the city. But of course, what you're seeing is the great Saigon River that connects to even the bigger Dong Nai River, the Na Bay system. And this part is largely undeveloped. It was largely undeveloped because the river is very big. It was very difficult to cross. So it was primarily agricultural. So the competition is looking at this kind of colonization of mirroring the city across the Saigon River. So again, for us, part of the design process, we often, as you'll have gotten the idea of by now, is we're very interested in looking back in history in order to project forward. Here are some images of what was then Saigon in 1955. So where we understand that waterways have been heavily engineered, that we see in the left image, and in the right, we have an incredible system of tree-lined boulevards, also as part of a tropical city, as a way of keeping the city cool, and where we also see the simultaneity of this incredible system of water transport, the importance of water in the city as movement, as commerce, but also with the French, where we started having a road-based system that has unfortunately also progressed to a great degree since the French have come into play. So here again, 1955, the same say set of historic photographs. In the foreground, we see the city of Saigon. We see the settlement with a grid system, but also very strongly tied to the natural topography, lowland, and the canals. And on the other side, so the emptiness of the east, and this is the site of our competition. So the way we began our work together, as we mentioned, we went to live in Hanoi for a month to work with our colleagues at the Vietnamese Institute of Urban Planning. And one of the Vietnamese collaborators there was able to work quite well with GIS and to work with different systems of understanding topography. So for us, it was very nice to begin to understand, even though, as Bruno described, it's a relatively flat area, but centimeters of land make all the difference. So what we saw, even in the short progression of time from 2013 to 2018, you see a massive filling in. So this bringing of sand, the chopping of mountains, the dredging of rivers to bring sand, to turn a wetland into a highland that is interesting for building. So for us, it was important to understand these microtopographies. And what was very particular, you could say, about this competition is it was, as I say, an invited international competition, but made it a point in time when many developers had already bought up and started to infill the land more. So the drawing you see on the left, the lowest one, was say what is presently planned by developers, which is even more filling in. So yellow is higher land. And we decided to try to freeze the development context that we sought in 2018 to keep what is medium land, say in green, to keep it and to make urbanism that could deal with that context. So how can we settle in a kind of marshy land and not have to resort to building, say, business as usual, which is filling 2 to 3 meters and then building on land, but to make a system, say, in between. So for us, it was a fundamental starting point, is to work with the topography we had and to make new morphologies and new typologies to respond. So this is the plan we ended up developing. As you can see, it's a system that has quite a lot of green. We wanted to create, similar to what you saw in the Mekong Development Plan, understand different agro-ecological regions, for us pushing back and keeping very strongly the mangrove system along the very large Dong Nai River, the darker blue, and then along the Saigon River, the smaller river you see more to in the center of the slide, to create a system of wetlands and productive landscapes. And then in between these two rivers to have a system of different parks. And so that the landscape, the water and the green structure is in fact what guides where to urbanize, where to not urbanize, and the different typologies of urbanization. very essential to our entire, say, strategy, again, trying to challenge business as usual, was to get away from development equals more cars, more roads, and as Bruno described in the Mekong Development Plan, equal access to us is something that is not necessarily to do by roads, but to understand when you have such a fine grained mesh of waterways, you can very economically and efficiently use this to your advantage. You can use it to simply dredge a little bit, dig a little bit deeper, and to have an incredible constellation. So we tried to develop a system by accentuating what was already there, developing a system that we called, instead of a metro, a wetro, where you could have a system where we would have an entire fleet of different size boats, where you could have an app, and you could, it was a based on demand transport system. So the same way maybe we have Uber, or in Asia, we have a system called Grab. You can ask for a certain size boat if you're a party of 2, or if you're a larger group hanging out in a certain place, needing 50 people to get on a boat. You can come with your motorbike, you can come with your scooter, and have a different system to traverse the territory. Of course, one of the biggest challenges in this area, as we know, is it is massively urbanizing. There's going to be the doubling of the population, another 9 million people. But at the same time, we said we had development plans by developers. So what you see on this slide, and we did this for 9 different typologies, we will just show you this 2 of them, is we drew a section, so the smaller sections you see on top of what is planned by the developers. And then we made the counter proposal in color, which we always made sure is more square meters of developments, but also more nature, more green, and more space for water. So we tried to have smaller footprints, higher density, and much more green, much more tropical green that's necessary for such a hot city, to combat things like heat island, to also absorb pollution, to create shade, but also a lot more space for water. We know we're having much more troubles of flooding, but also to create, as you see in the bottom slide, the bottom section, sorry, new typologies where we challenge public space, we start creating public space in buildings, and also even using rooftops to create new forms of energy. And then we developed, as was required as the competition, to develop a zoom in. So what you see on the left is a developer's already master plan for this area, and then say our counter proposal, which accentuates different areas of wetness. So the dark blue is where we would have different, say, piers and water-based transport. Stemming out from that, we then have an area that is just mangroves and water, so not necessarily a human accessible nature. Then the next area, going from the water towards the highland, we have areas of buildings that are on stilts that you can see in the section below. And then finally, we start getting to higher ground where we have buildings that actually touch the earth. And important for us is that we also, if you see in the plan, extreme over to your right, we try to incorporate the existing settlements instead of, say, the tabula rasa of wiping them clean, trying to work with what we had and incorporate them into the new development. And as a final image we also left with the government was that we said for every new person, so another 9 million people you might bring into this new development area, every person should have a tree as a way to simultaneously urbanize, but also to create new urban nature that we know is absolutely more necessary as we continue to develop. Few alumni online, including Carlos, who worked with us on the project we just showed, but we all, our research and education is tied together through the International Center of Urbanism. We're also hosting a very large conference in June about urban forest urbanism, and global warming that we invite anybody who's interested to come to. And of course, we have postgraduate programs. And finally, we end with this, and going back to the start with Claudia, talking about water urbanism and how water urbanism is something we've been obsessed with for quite a long time. We've started and been working a lot in Asia, and hope that we can continue to develop water urbanism together with some of you in Latin America. So with that, we end and look forward to a discussion, and I will maybe stop sharing the screen. Yes.
And we have lunch.
Hello? We don't hear anybody.
No, you hope it
Kelly, Claudia was translating
Okay.
in this moment, so now she's switching to the other channel so she can start talking. So just 5 minutes and she's
Sure.
coming back.
Okay, no, of course.
Okay, 2 cigarettes and a coffee. That's okay.
So I think that after Claudia come back, we can stop for 5 minutes, go to the toilet, all the things, and we come back and she have the time to switch back. If that's there, she's coming.
Okay. Was it clear, Karen, with or was it a bit too fast or?
I think it was a bit too fast for the first interpreter, but then so Claudia shifts, and as she knows also the projects that help to explain to the students, and that was covered.
Okay. Sorry for that. We have to get used to slowing down.
Oops.
Claudia, ¿estás ahí?
¿Aló? ¿Me pueden escuchar?
Escuchamos. Sí, Claudia, te escuchamos.
Listo. Un momento. Ya, un momento que abro aquí el formulario con las preguntas. Un segundo.
Claudia, si das unos minutos, porque nosotros estamos avisando en el canal que justamente estabas haciendo el cambio de traducción de intérprete de vuelta a este canal para todos. Entonces, como que dimos 5 minutos, creo que ahora se levantaron un ratito Kelly y Bruno y ya
Perfecto.
vuelven en 5 segundos, ¿sí?
Listo. Ahí todo bien, que hagan más preguntas.
Ahí creo que están volviendo Kelly y Bruno.
We can hear you, Karen.
Yes, Claudia, they are ready, so we can continue.
Okay.
Perfect.
We leave it to you.
Great. Thank you very much, Kelly and Bruno. It was really, really amazing. I knew the first project, but the other ones, it was very nice to see. So right now there are 3 questions. So I will, send that to you, and maybe the reply afterwards. I will do it in Spanish, but without the shifting. So, let's see. Bueno, Hay una pregunta de la profesora Sandra Vivas. La pregunta va dirigida para Kelly. Okay, so Kelly, this is a question for you. The one professor from here, she wants to know if there was participation from the residents in the formulation of the proposals for the plan. Yeah, I'm not sure if it's the first one or the second one, because she said the director plan, so maybe one example.
Well, I think the best way we can answer that is in the way the Vietnamese government works. It's a quite hierarchical government system, but very interestingly, it goes down to the cells of people's committees, down to the level of neighborhoods, but also special interest groups. They have a women's group, a youth group. And of course, every time we would present a work in progress for feedback with politicians, it would be inclusive of various groups from these people's committees and these special interest groups. That's one thing. So we throughout the years, we had a constant, feedback system. Also, we did quite a lot of field work, going on motorbikes and then boats, and simply talking to people living in projects and working on the land. So you could say we had participation in that way. And then we also had quite a lot of discussions with various experts from different departments outside of urbanism. So to get quite a few different views. So I think built into the system of the Vietnamese planning process is and has been a process of participation for quite some decades. So sorry, it's maybe too long for you.
Okay.
But you catch it anyways, I think the idea, Claudia.
Sí, ellos dicen que pues en Vietnam el sistema es diferente, hay un sistema jerárquico, en la parte superior pues los políticos, pero luego hay comités de gente y también estos comités entonces vienen con grupos de vecinos, y en los grupos de vecinos hay jóvenes, niños, bueno. Entonces, cada vez que ellos tenían que presentar sus planes a los políticos, estaban también gente de los comités y diferentes actores de estos grupos. Entonces, se puede decir que en todo este tiempo hubo siempre una retroalimentación de las propuestas que ellos realizaban. Pero adicionalmente, ellos siempre hicieron mucho trabajo de campo. Parte del trabajo pues, fue recorrer todo Vietnam en motocicletas, hablar con la gente también, entender pues, las necesidades de la gente. Y por otra parte, ellos también hicieron discusiones con expertos en otros campos, porque eso lo he añadido yo. Obviamente, los arquitectos no podemos resolver todo solos. Entonces, es así como ha funcionado esta interacción, siempre en el marco del sistema de planeación de Vietnam. Listo. Entonces, vamos por la siguiente pregunta que la hace Mauricio Andrés Puerta. Es para los dos y él pregunta que cuáles aspectos socioculturales influenciaron como el diseño de las tipologías constructivas y de las intervenciones urbanas que ustedes desarrollaron. I'm sorry, I said in Spanish. What social cultural aspects have influenced the typological constructive forms in the urban interventions you carry out? Is the question for both?
Yes. Okay, Kelly, go ahead.
Well, maybe I think for us, I think what we tried to show, beginning with what Bruno started with of understanding the kind of deep and long history of this part of the world, Vietnamese and other ethnic groups, and how their, say, cosmology and way of understanding the world was very much based on the meanings of water and of land. So as one, say, understanding of culture. But then I think also in the project Bruno explained, and that you know very well, Claudia, understanding these agro-ecological regions for us, of how the different types of lands, soils, topographies, also by doing a lot of field work, led us to understand that what looks all the same, maybe at a first glance, when you actually really try to go a little bit deeper, you see a lot of nuance and a lot of different ways that different ethnic groups, but also simply different people live, floating, as Bruno showed in some of the slides, floating in the river, floating houses, stilt houses. So for us, it's very interesting to understand what's now known as TEC, traditional ecological knowledge, and how this as a kind of society and cultural ways has led to settlement, and how we can update that, how we can not be nostalgic, but how we can learn from that to make very new ways of understanding it. And for us, we think that a lot of the contemporary Vietnamese architects, young generation, also we're proud to say some of our alumni, are really making great strides to understand local materials, different technologies, and this kind of traditional way of working, but without being nostalgic. So this kind of cultural histories married with environmental histories is really interesting as a way to go forward for us.
Thank you. So yeah, they said, as you could see, la respuesta fue que, como ustedes pudieron ver en la presentación, ellos siempre miran a la historia de cómo se desarrolló el lugar. Y no solo la historia, sino también entienden la cosmología, ¿no?, del pensamiento de las personas que habitan este lugar. Que muchas veces pues es diferente a las otras personas. Pero también entienden muy bien como esas condiciones ya físicas, ¿no? Lo de los suelos, si son agroecológicos, cómo hay variaciones en las regiones por el tipo de suelo, por la topografía, por la vegetación. Ellos dicen que a veces uno piensa que un territorio es como muy homogéneo, pero que si mira de fondo puede ver pues muchas variaciones que también a veces están asociadas a diferentes grupos étnicos. Por ejemplo, pues en el trabajo de campo ellos veían, pues la gente, bueno, ustedes también vieron en las fotos cómo la gente usaba estos canales, pero también habían casas en pilotes, y pues esto muestra esas relaciones culturales y esas formas particulares. Ellos siempre tratan pues de entender esas tradiciones y esas cosas locales, pero ellos no quieren ser nostálgicos, quieren aprender de eso y obviamente traducirlo a la actualidad. Y también remarcan que, por ejemplo, muchos arquitectos en Vietnam están entendiendo lo mismo. Estos arquitectos trabajan mucho con materiales locales y con técnicas locales, pero lo mismo, no tratan de ser nostálgicos, sino tratan de hacer cosas muy apropiadas para este momento. Mi traducción no es exacta, pero es más como pues, un resumen así de la respuesta. So we have another answer from Victoria Inspran. She asked you both what system for getting rid of water and wastewater and treatment for this wastewater were proposed in the project and in the Delta.
In Spanish, Claudia. ¿La pregunta en español también para los presentes?
Sí. Bueno, aquí la pregunta es, ¿qué sistema de desagües cloacales y qué tratamiento son los propuestos en el proyecto del Delta? Y muchas gracias. Kelly? No?
Yeah. Kelly should answer, but let me try a few things. But there's no direct answer in a one-way thing. It's also depending on the scales, and it's also depending on where we worked. But by definition, we try to move as much as possible to decentralized systems and as much as nature-based solutions. Sometimes they are much easier, between brackets, as for example in the coastal systems, and if we're moving in a direction towards mangroves in which inhabitation is embedded, but in which mangroves are the basic landscape system, then yeah, mangroves are by definition known as the best purifying system that exists for water in the world. There's nothing that can beat it anyways. But of course, when we're dealing closer to cities, it's all about implementing a set of phytoremediation systems next to neighborhood is shifting to decentralized systems, and it is one of the classics lines in our plans is we provide much more space for water, and we provide much more space for movement in water. And by providing more space, there also can be specialized spaces for water purifications. We have, depending on where and how and densities, we work with irrigated lagoons, we work with constructed wetlands, and so on.
Thank you. So, Spanish. No hay una respuesta única para este problema. Entonces, depende mucho de la escala. Pero en términos generales, ellos siempre tratan de diseñar sistemas descentralizados y de trabajar con soluciones basadas en la naturaleza. Por ejemplo, en la zona donde hay manglares, de hecho, los manglares son un sistema natural de purificación. Entonces, ellos los integran en sus diseños como sistema de tratamiento de agua residual. En las ciudades ellos trabajan, por ejemplo, en las ciudades trabajan sistemas de fitorremediación. En general, también, bueno, en todas sus propuestas, digamos, la estrategia es dar más espacio al agua. Y cuando, pues, dar más espacio al agua también para que el agua se mueva y de esta forma, pues, se generen esos procesos naturales que ayudan a que el agua se limpie. Entonces, siempre combinan elementos como las lagunas aeradas o los humedales construidos como parte de estos sistemas. So, we have 3 questions more, so I don't know if you have enough time to answer these 3 questions.
If they're short and sweet.
Okay, I will make them short. This is coming from Rafael Prieto, and he is asking, hello, good morning. He first wants to say congrats to Kelly and Bruno for this great project. And the question is, what could be the differential or similar factor between the population of Vietnam and Cambodia about the understanding the way of inhabiting with water, knowing that they are different cultures. And before you answer, I will say that too in Spanish. So the question here, Rafael is asking is, ¿cuáles serían las diferencias o factores similares entre la población de Vietnam y de Camboya, teniendo en cuenta que ellos entienden el agua de formas diferentes porque son diferentes culturas?
Okay, I can start, and Bruno will maybe add to it. I think that for us, that's very interesting. We are now starting to do also more and more work in Cambodia, but we couldn't present all. Cambodia is a culture with also a very, very long history. And the Khmer are kind of an interesting group of people that are highly influenced by being between very big powers, influenced by Hinduism from India, but also from the other, say, Confucianism and Buddhism from China and Southeast Asia. So they also have very particular symbolic relationships to water that are different than the, say, Vietnamese, who are primarily Buddhist. But also the people in the Mekong Delta, you could say they share, whether they're Khmer or Kin, Vietnamese, but also Chams. They share a culture of this liquid landscape, surviving with trading, surviving with fishing, surviving with wet agriculture. And of course, it's highly nuanced. So we're now doing a study in Cambodia around the lake that Bruno talked about a little bit. And there's 5 even agro-ecological zones just around the lake that have very different groups inhabiting them with very different outlooks of how to settle. So there's some groups of people that settle on very high stilts, others that live on floating housing. So it is very, very nuanced culturally. And even within, say, Vietnam and Cambodia, it's also quite different. But interesting to know is that there are many, say, Cambodians in Vietnam and many Vietnamese in Cambodia that also then have to change their way of settling due to internal politics. So, for instance, the Vietnamese in Cambodia are not giving full citizenship, you could say, and they primarily live in floating housing as a way of not having land tenure. So it becomes a very interesting cultural, but also political, tied to geographical situation.
Thank you. So, in Spanish. Bueno, aquí hay que entender también toda esa larga historia de Camboya. De hecho, ellos están empezando a trabajar en un proyecto específicamente en Camboya. En Camboya hay pues diferentes influencias también religiosas de la India y del hinduismo y también del budismo de Asia y del sureste de Asia. Entonces, en ese sentido, son diferentes a los vietnamitas, como más en esa parte ya cultural de lo que significa el agua para ellos. Sin embargo, comparten de todas formas esos elementos de vivir en esos tipos de landscape que son, digamos, como muy líquidos, ¿no? Y en las formas de producir en ese paisaje a través de la pesca y la agricultura. Por ejemplo, en el caso de Camboya, pues hay que entender esas diferencias también son como muy sutiles. Entonces, por ejemplo, en el lago donde están haciendo su proyecto ahora, hay 5 zonas agroecológicas y en cada una de esas zonas agroecológicas hay diferentes formas de habitar esas zonas de acuerdo a sus características. Y el otro tema que hay que entender es que de hecho, bueno, muchas personas de Camboya viven en Vietnam y viceversa. Entonces, por ejemplo, en Camboya los vietnamitas no tienen un estatus legal y entonces no pueden ocupar la tierra y por eso tienen que vivir en botes. Entonces también hay que considerar como esa serie de factores políticos que influyen en el tema, porque es el hecho de que pues vivan en estos dos países como extranjeros, pues significa como que tienen que adaptarse a esas otras formas de pensar con el agua. So this question is from Paula Camacho. She is asking this question for Kelly. And she wants to know what are the planning instruments that are essential for water landscapes. Para todos, Paula Camacho está preguntando cuáles son los instrumentos de planificación esenciales para los paisajes del lago.
So I think in general, what we've tried to show is that to start with, of course, it's trying to deeply understand hydrology, trying to understand the water system. And often for us, understanding the water system means zooming out, understanding. That's why we started showing you at the scale of a watershed. So understanding the bigger scales and systems and ecologies of water is first and foremost for us really interesting. And we don't have, and for that it's important. And for all of these projects, we've always had the fortune to be able to talk to and to gain insights from local hydrologists, because of course it's another field that we only have rudimentary knowledge and expertise. As much working with that, and for us it becomes very interesting. We've always spoken about water urbanism, but for us a very important, say, flip side is forest urbanism, because the water and the forest are needing one another, and they're both somehow transformed and threatened, you could say, by agriculture and by urbanism. No, so understanding deeply ecological systems of water related to vegetation and soil, and then how that is impacted by anthropogenic human systems of agriculture and urbanization. And basically a lot of our work, and we think probably a lot of work for the future urbanists and planners of the world, is to restore these ecologies, to restore these disturbed and water systems, forest systems, soil systems, in order to let humankind continue and to let non-humankind continue on the earth. So we see it all very much tied together.
So if just a simple addition is, of course, we start from the understanding of the water system. Like for the Mekong Delta plan, the division in the Mekong Delta in units of management, of 80 units of management that are sub-basins that are regulating the water system, the understanding of that is the first step. The second step is understanding the way in which it is managed by agronomists and by hydrologists, and then working with the terms of agronomy and working with the terms of the hydrologists in this existing water management system. Planning should not be a separate thing beside the water managers already in place, no?
Bueno, con relación a esta pregunta, ellos dicen que pues siempre parten de un entendimiento muy profundo de la hidrología. Y para esto ellos tienen que hacer como zoom out para entender, por ejemplo, las cuencas hídricas. También ellos han sido muy afortunados de que en todos los proyectos han hablado con ingenieros hidráulicos locales. Bueno, y en este punto también hay que entender, pues, lo que mostraron hoy es especialmente sobre urbanismo del agua, pero ellos también trabajan en como el urbanismo del bosque, ¿no? Y hay que entender por qué, porque estos dos elementos están muy relacionados entre ellos, pero también afrontan las mismas amenazas de, por ejemplo, la agricultura y la ganadería. Bueno, entonces esto es muy importante, yo creo que para todos los estudiantes también. El trabajo de ellos, que consideran que este trabajo de ellos también para el futuro, y por eso digo que también para todos los estudiantes, es de hecho restaurar esos ecosistemas que han sufrido esos impactos de la agricultura y la urbanización. Restaurar los suelos, restaurar los bosques, restaurar los sistemas hídricos, no solo para los humanos, sino también para los no humanos, para que puedan vivir después en este planeta. Y a esto Bruno también añade algo. Él dice que, bueno, por ejemplo, en el plan de regional del Mekong Delta fue muy importante cuando ellos trabajaron en el plan entender pues cómo funcionaba el manejo del agua. Allá hay 18 unidades de manejo de agua que regulan el sistema. Entonces ellos tenían que entender esto pues en términos físicos, pero también cómo los hidráulicos y los hidrólogos manejaban este sistema y lo regulaban. Y también quieren como resaltar, que también es muy importante para todos nosotros, que la planeación no debe estar separada de, por ejemplo, la agricultura o la ecología, sino que tienen que siempre conversar, y la hidráulica y la hidrología. Ya nos quedan solo 2 preguntas. We only have 2 more questions, so almost finishing. And this question is for Kelly. So Diana Loret de Mola, she wants to ask how the strategies that you propose and the projects you propose are related to the Sustainable Development Goals of the UN. Yep. Y para todos les repito la pregunta de Diana Lorena. Ella pregunta cómo el trabajo de los profesores en los proyectos se relacionan con los objetivos estratégicos de la ONU.
Well, I think we all know, I think by now quite well, of the discourse around the different development goals by UN Habitat. And I think in general, we, as most architects and urbanists and planners, I suppose, would be always striving to somehow address all 17 of them. Of course, the ones that are of particular focus for us have a lot to do with number 6, we know, is about clean water. We know that water is a major challenge, water security and food security. Sustainable goal number 7, which is really about clean energy. We know that that's something that's maybe not usually in the realm of our thinking as urbanists, but it is more and more a design project for urbanism, coming up with how to integrate new forms of energy together with productive landscapes and together with new public space. Of course, one of the most central to our fields, we know is sustainable goal number 11, which has a lot to do with the notion of sustainable cities, trying to create a balance between consumptive and productive landscapes, trying to go towards lowering emissions, trying to go towards nature-based solutions. And for us, really, really important also, and a huge, say, opportunity is climate action. We see of global warming and climate change as problems, but for us, there are also major opportunities to think of new ways of inhabiting, new ways of settling with water, new ways of settling with forests. So I think in particular, those are the ones that are very central to the work that we suppose most of the audience are able to relate to.
Thank you very much. Bueno, ellos dicen que obviamente el trabajo en general después de los arquitectos y de los urbanistas está muy de la mano de los objetivos de desarrollo de UN Habitat. Entonces esos 17 objetivos pues siempre son como una tarea para los arquitectos y los urbanistas, pero específicamente pues el trabajo de ellos se relaciona mucho más con el número 6, que es agua limpia, pues que es importante obviamente para la humanidad, pero también para la seguridad alimentaria. También con el número 7, que es energía limpia, que es algo que normalmente pues se considera que no es parte como del trabajo de los urbanistas y los arquitectos, pero que en realidad cada vez se hace más obvio y necesario que hay una necesidad de integrar nuevas formas de energía al espacio, al ambiente construido. Y por último, pues el que es más central es el 11, que es el que es de ciudades sostenibles, y obviamente después para encontrar ese balance entre pues, la productividad, la urbanización y la ecología, de trabajar con soluciones basadas en la naturaleza y de disminuir pues, las emisiones de carbono. Y también quieren resaltar pues, que para ellos es muy importante responder al cambio climático, actuar, ¿no? Como en respuesta a esos desafíos del cambio climático que normalmente se ven como problemas, pero que también pueden representar una oportunidad. Y en el caso de los proyectos de ellos, como los mostraron, pues son oportunidades para desarrollar nuevas formas de habitar o de asentarse con el agua y con los bosques. Nuestra última pregunta es de Angelo Almeida, y él pregunta para los dos. Bueno, so the question of Angelo Almeida is, he said is actually more a comment. He wants to say that your research work and urban design do that is incredible, and he even thinks that this is como aiming towards a future that could save humanity from the ecological disasters. So he really hopes that you continue working on this vision, and thank you very much.
I don't know, it's not really a question, so thank you for the compliment.
Yes,
and,
it's more
thank you for the common concern about what we have to do with our world and what design research can potentially contribute to that.
Yo tengo aún que leer la pregunta para la gente que está escuchando solo en español, entonces es solamente un comentario que hace al final Angelo Almeida, y él solo quería comentar que el trabajo de investigación y diseño urbano de los profesores es increíble, e incluso le parece que apunta a un futuro que podría salvar al mundo de los desastres ecológicos, y él espera que continúen desarrollando su gran visión. I think it's actually a very good comment, that we really appreciate your presentation and the time you took to give us this lecture. I'm very happy to have host this meeting. So I think there are no more questions right now, and there are no more comments. Yeah, I just want to add that it has been great, and I really hope that our students really take inspiration in this work, and that they start to understand ecosystems and the importance of addressing issues like climate change. So yeah, I think we can end now, but finally I also want to thank you, Karen Stanley from Paraguay, because without her we couldn't have do this meeting. She was really helpful. Yeah, so this is.
Put your video on, Karen.
Yeah.
Oh, yes, you exist. Okay.
But really, thank you very much to also everybody for also the nice questions. And as Claudia said, we hope to be able to continue design research together, potentially with some of you. And we would really like to have some more collaborations, particularly with many of our alumni that are here, and hopefully new friends and new collaborations along the way, because there's clearly a lot that needs to be done from design research perspective. So thank you very much also for the invitation, Claudia, and for organizing it, and for all your organization as well, Karen. It's been really nice for us.
Thank you. Have a nice evening. We still have the
Claudia, lo que se le puede mencionar es el link que presentó Kelly en el chat, si le querés explicar eso a los alumnos.
Sí. Una última cosa, bueno, los profesores también agradecen a todos los que asistieron a esta conferencia. Y también pues les agrada saber que como que se comparten esas preocupaciones por el cambio climático y por los problemas ecosistémicos. Los invitan, ellos esperan que en el futuro podamos seguir pues colaborando con los exalumnos de KU Leuven que se conectaron hoy, pero también esperan que haya nuevos alumnos e investigadores que quieran trabajar con ellos. En el link copiamos la página, bueno, la profesora Kelly copió la página para una convocatoria para una escuela de verano que se llama como diseñar para el cambio climático en Bélgica, a la que los invito. Y pues yo también los invito a revisar de nuevo las páginas del programa de KU Leuven. Si están interesados en hacer una maestría en urbanismo, en asentamientos humanos, pues creo que es el lugar adecuado para hacerlo. Entonces terminamos aquí nuestra charla y de nuevo muchas gracias a todos los que se conectaron.
Thank
Hasta
you.
luego.
Bye bye.
Chao,
Bye,
chao,
bye.
gracias.